Hi, welcome to the next episode of Bite-Sized Psychometrics. Today we're going to talk about introduction to the test development cycle. This idea was jogged during a discussion I had at the NCME conference a few weeks ago in Denver with a friend of mine. We were talking about how graduate school didn't adequately prepare us for certain parts, careers in the test development and psychometrics industry. In particular, I look back at my training where I focused a lot on factor analysis, item response theory, and adaptive testing. For my dissertation, I delved very deeply into adaptive testing for pass-fail decisions. But then when I got my first job, which was at a healthcare certification organization, they weren't doing adaptive testing. I realized that most organizations don't. And instead, I was doing much more basic things like how do you set a cut score, which had never occurred to me before. So we're going to talk about some of the basic test development, things like that, so that as a psychometrician, you can see a wider picture of this. But even if you're coming in from other areas like non-psychometricians, you can see where psychometrics fits into the need of the test development cycle. So what is test development? Test development is the formative process of creating and maintaining a high-quality test or exam. There's a lot of work that goes into it. And you think about the work there's commensurate with the stakes of the test. So a fifth grade math quiz probably doesn't require very much test development. The teacher's going to write 10 questions and put them up on Google Forms or something like that. Whereas a university admissions test or a physician certification licensure test, those are really, really high stakes. So millions of dollars will go into developing those tests. And there's different things that go into the stages of each of these, whether it's item writing, designing the test, how to set a cut score, how to determine what's in the score report. There's a lot of work that goes into it besides the quantitative psychometric aspects. So while there is, the data science quantitative psychometric aspects, there are so many other things that go into test development, and I wanted to briefly cover some of those here so we can see the big picture. So who says what is needed as part of this cycle? Well, it depends what type of test you're doing, but there are a couple references out there. One is the AERA, NCME, APA standards, which talks a lot about what makes a good test. And you notice there that is both for education and psychology, AERA and APA. It's tended to be general enough for both. Whereas NCCA and ISO IEC 17024, which is the ANSI National Accrediting Board, those focus entirely on certification exams. And they have very specific guidelines on what goes into test development for certification exams. So if you work in those areas, I recommend you go look at those standards. So here's my depiction of the test development cycle. I'm going to walk through some of these. First of all, why is it a cycle? Well, because usually a test is not developed just once. It's going to be renewed every so often. In the case of certification exams, they might replace a couple questions every year, but then they might redesign the test every 5 years because they have to make sure that it still covers whatever's the current content that's out there in the profession. And next question is, are we going to always need all of these steps here? And the answer is no. In some cases, you're going to skip these, or it's going to be a really small case. And it depends upon not just the type of test, but the cycle of the test. So if it's a certification test that's being continuously administered, like anybody can take it any day of the year, that's a lot different than a certification test that is delivered twice a year, let's say in December and May. And everybody, you might have thousands of people take the exam on one Saturday in each of those months. And therefore, the whole process, the cycle is different. So a little bit more about each of these. The first thing to do is the scope and definition discussion, which decides what exactly the test is going to do, what role does it fill. This is really a foundation for validity, because validity, of course, is the documentation that you have that supports the interpretations of your test scores. So the first thing you're doing here is defining what is the test being used for. Why are we using these scores? Is it going to be to predict job performance? Is it going to be to say this person's certified as a physician? Is it to predict performance at a university? What is it? The next thing we do is need to design the test, which if it's a certification exam, that's usually done with a job analysis. But in K-12, it might be based on some sort of curriculum alignment study or something else. Then you're going to turn that general design into test specifications or blueprints, which specifically says what types of items you're going to have, how many in each content area, how long is the test, what's the time limit, things like that. Then once you know what's going to be in the test, you're going to write the test questions. Usually the subject matter experts are going to do that. So, if it's an ophthalmology test, you're probably going to have ophthalmologists write the questions, not just anybody off the street. Then you'll review the items. So if it's a high stakes test, the items have to be reviewed at least by one person, usually by 2 or 3. Like you might have 2 ophthalmologists review it, plus a psychometrician review it. Then you're going to make sure that the tests are piloted, or the items are piloted, and depending on what type of cycle, again, you have here. In some cases, you're just going to publish the test right away. In other cases, you're going to pilot the items. So if it's a continuous test, you might have a 100-item test that's out there, and there's also going to be 10 unscored items. And you're always rotating in 10 unscored items. Once you get the data on the pilot exams, you're going to statistically analyze them and review the questions again. So you're going to flag items that are too difficult, too easy, too confusing, depending upon whether you're using IRT or classical test theory. It's up to you how you want to do that. There's going to be different guidelines, but the idea is here that you're going to make sure that the items are piloted first. You're going to analyze some statistics and then either revise the items or throw them out if they're not good enough at all. Then once you got items with all statistics, you're going to assemble your test form. Again, if it's a twice a year type of thing, there's going to be very specific days, and each day is going to have one test form. But if you've got a continuous test, you might have multiple test forms out there at one time, and you're always rotating in new test forms. So there's a lot of work that could potentially go into this. And you can see how these still rely on the quantitative psychometric side. You still need a psychometrician to run those statistical analyses and then use that to assemble forms, especially if the forms are going to be equated. So there's a lot of work that goes along in here, but it's hand in hand between test development, management, the subject matter experts, and the psychometricians. They all have to work together as a team. Once you assemble a test form, especially if it's the first one, you're going to do standard setting, which is deciding what is the cut score or cut scores on the assessment. If it's a certification exam that's being continuously delivered and you want people to have immediate results, or at least results within a week, you have to set the cut score ahead of time. But often in K-12, you're setting the cut score after the fact, because you might deliver the end of year exam, let's say in April every year. You get all that data, and then you're going to have the teachers review all the results, do all the psychometrics in May, let's say. And then you might set the cut scores then based upon the results of the test. Depending, of course, whether you do the standard setting before or after, then the next thing is going to be the live testing, actually delivering the test to live candidates. And then after the test is delivered to live candidates, you're going to do a statistical analysis review again. Like with a K-12 approach, if all the tests are delivered in April every year, you're going to do that statistical analysis in May, most likely. But if you're doing the certification with continuous publishing, you're really, most likely rolling out those 10 pilot items, maybe every couple months, get some new ones, do some statistical analysis, replace them, do live testing, get some more. It's just a continuous cycle in those cases. And then after that, you might have to worry about equating or scaling, especially if we're talking about K-12 here. This is going to be this post-equating, in that you're going to take this year's results and try to equate them to last year's results. And finally, again, then you're going to do the score reporting after that case. But, like I talked about all the way through here, these always aren't going to be the same. If you got continuous testing versus 2 windows a year versus 1 window a year, maybe certification, pre-employment, K-12, university admissions, they all have different practical guidelines or constraints around this. And you can change the order and the work that goes into each of these pieces based upon how the test is being developed. So why are we doing all this? Well, validity. Validity you can think of as a chain of evidence. So if I go back and look at that previous slide, the last piece there was score reporting, and validity, of course, is the evidence you have that links the scores back to the original purpose of the test. Like, why are we using these tests? How are we interpreting the scores? Which goes basically backwards through the cycle. So having documentation for every piece of the cycle as you move through it is really the foundation for validity. So that's why the test development cycle is so important. It is the foundation for most of what we do in terms of assessment and providing documentation about validity. So that's a quick introduction to the test development cycle. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you on the next episode.